My name's Nathaniel, and welcome to Tank Encyclopedia's weekly report. If you're wondering where Lucian went, well, we threw him underneath a tank for his innumerable failures. Nah, I'm kidding. The man's got a lot of stuff to do to keep Tank Encyclopedia running, and he needed to shed some work, which is where I come in. Just a little about me before we get started. I'm an independent historian who has performed archival and restoration tasks with various museums, such as the Durham Light Infantry Museum and the Old Rhinebeck Aerodrome. I have assisted with World War I aircraft restoration, as well as the operation and restoration of World War I military vehicles, such as a Columbia ambulance and an M1917 light tank. At the end of the day, my main goal is the preservation and dissemination of historical knowledge, which is why I am honored to bring you this week's episode of Weekly Report. Let's have a look at this week's articles. We started up with a big bang, having a look at the famous Churchill Aviary, the proper one that served in the Second World War. Designed after the disastrous Death Parade, the AVRE was designed to give armored protection to a team of combat engineers. This tank was armed with a massive 290mm petard mortar, a devastating weapon designed for bunker busting and obstacle clearance. A wealth of other equipment was also employed by the AVREs. This included fascines, carpet layers, and bridge laying equipment. The AVREs were first deployed on D-Day and served admirably throughout the remainder of the war. One even took on a Panther tank and won. This article was written by Mark Nash and illustrated by David Bocale and J.C. Amazones Davis. Next up, we turned our gaze to the People's Republic of China and the WZ-122-1 main battle tank prototype of the 1970s. The WZ-122 was designed in the context of the Sino-Soviet split, with the main goal being the creation of a tank to rival other main battle tanks of the epoch. Wanting an advanced tank, the WZ-122-1 was designed with a hydropneumatic suspension and modern technologies. Later, however, this design was deemed too complicated and unreliable, so a simplified WZ-122-2 was made, which we will investigate in a future article. This was the first article by Malik Catanium Cash, to whom we would like to wish many more. It was also illustrated by Yaroslav Yarja-Janis, with corrections by J.C. Amazones Davis. And finally, our Type 98 Cheney article got updated with an illustration. This strange-looking vehicle was a cheaper alternative to the Type 97 Chi-Ha. At the time of its conception, the Cheney was considered to be the superior tank, as it was much lighter and cheaper to build. However, while the Cheney and Chi-Ha trials were in progress, the Marco Polo bridge incident of July 7, 1937 occurred, marking the start of the Second Sino-Japanese War. Peacetime budgetary limitations evaporated with the outbreak of hostilities with China. With this, the somewhat more powerful and expensive Type 97 Chi-Ha was accepted for development and service as the Imperial Japanese Army's new medium tank. It would go on to become one of Japan's most highly produced tanks. Only one Cheney prototype was ever constructed, however. This article was written by Mark Nash and illustrated by Andrei Akhtaten Karushkin. Now, let's pass to Lawrence and hear what the gaming news is for this week.
This week's gaming news will look at several new tanks currently in development for armoured warfare. First up is the Tiran 6, a Tier 3 MBT for the upcoming Israeli MBT branch. This will replace the previously announced Tier 3, the Shot Kal Dalat, which is now going to be a Tier 2. In real life, the Tiran 6 were Egyptian or Syrian T-62s that were captured during the 1973 Yom Kippur War. These were then modified with additional machine guns, stowage boxes, infantry telephones, and other bits and bobs. They were then assigned to reserve units and other rear echelon duties and were phased out from service during the 80s. Now we jump to some higher tiers. The Merkava Mark 3D Barak Soher is a Tier 8 MBT for the Israeli branch. It will be the first Israeli tank fitted with the 120mm smooth boring game, which will allow it to hit further and bigger. It has upgraded armor, rangefinder, and a few other little tidbits. It will be similar to the Israeli Tier 6 MBT in that it can be a frontline fighter, having the highest hit points of its tier, but also a sniper with its gun. While not having the thickest armor, it does have the Dor Dalat armor kit and an active protection kit that can be upgraded, giving it better protection. Next we have the Merkava Mark IV. This is a Tier 9 progression MBT and is similar looking to the Merkava Mark III, but has a few upgrades, like armor, an upgraded 120mm smoothbore gun, and better protection systems. It will be one of the biggest damage dealers in the game, with an average of 5,000 damage per minute. Its 120mm gun may have the lowest damage per shot, but it makes up for this with a high rate of fire, as well as the ability to fire the LAHAT guided missile. The disadvantage is an average mobility, which makes it more suited to a supporting role rather than a flanking role. Another tank for the Israeli branch is the Merkava Mark IV M Windbreaker, a Tier 10 progression MBT. At Tier 10, MBTs are niche vehicles, which will see the Windbreaker's specialty being its active protections. It will also have the most hit points of its tier. Its trophy active protection system will also be able to be upgraded. In-game, it is more of a long-range sniper, using its thick Torah armor and trophy APS to reduce the effectiveness of incoming fire, while taking out enemy targets from a comfortable distance with its 120mm smoothbore. Finally, we have the Leopard 2 Revolution. This is a Tier 8 premium MBT that can be purchased within the client for gold. The Revolution is an upgrade of the Evolution, which is essentially a modernization of the Leopard 2A4. In-game, it will have an upgraded periscope, which will also feature a thermal imager, a remote-controlled Kimek machine gun, and advanced armor. It also comes equipped with the ROSY smoke grenade launchers and the Rheinmetall situation awareness system. We want to end the news by taking a brief look at the new Centurion Mark V-1 RAAC tank for the world of tanks. It is a British Tier 8 premium medium tank and is meant to represent the Australian versions of the Centurion, including the famous nuclear blasted tank. It has improved armor, suspension, and gun. However, the model used in-game is wrong, plus the gameplay stats means that it is a literal pay-to-win version of the Centurion, another example of the world of tanks taking liberties with history and advantages of the player base.
Thank you, Lawrence. Now, we've also had a couple of questions from our patrons. Deadly Dilemma asked us, what interwar design was the most forward-thinking? What design was most backwards? We've discussed both of these questions internally, and we've mostly agreed that the Vickers Medium Mark I was one of the most forward-thinking tanks of the early interwar period. A good turret layout with 3 men seated inside, freeing the commander to do his job. It also sported a good dual-purpose 47mm gun, a coaxial machine gun, and eventually a radio was installed. Also, the chassis got reused for an entire family of vehicles, including an artillery tractor, which might have actually preceded the tank, a gun carrier, a bridge carrier, and a command tank. For the early 1920s, the Vickers Medium Mark I was eons ahead of any competition. As for the most backwards, that's a hard question to answer. There were large numbers of bad projects that rightfully died on the drawing board, but we'll probably give it to the Renault R35 and the Hotchkiss H35. While both were innovative in their construction, in essence they were just scaled up Renault FTs, with better armor, the same gun, and slightly better mobility, but built 17 years after the fact and expected to serve long after. What was worse, they kept the same 2-man arrangement that proved unsuitable during the fighting in France and Belgium. Also, Gollum asked us what tank design was likely to appear, but was held back by political influence. The first thing we thought about was the Birch Gun. It was the first modern self-propelled gun that was able to keep up with the armor, but in typical British fashion of the time, it was ignored. Then, in the 1940s, the Brits scrambled around trying to flesh out an idea that they could have already built and put into service decades prior. Anyway, that is all for this week. All the best, and keep us in your sights.